The Bearheart Cabin sits in a quiet, rarely visited corner of Mount Rainier National Park, a 10-minute walk from Carbon River Ranger Station. It is a small, deep brown cabin in the middle of a 100-foot forest clearing, a tiny island amidst an ocean of snow-caked spruce trees. The sudden snowstorms and resulting water damage to the visitor centers have left the park mostly uninhabited this winter, apart from the rangers overseeing the repairs, the construction workers who come out to the park whenever they feel like working in the cold, and the 5 teenagers on holiday who decided to take advantage of the situation. Spending a weekend in the snowy mountains had been Shauna Whitecloud's idea. Her father was a park ranger, and she and Bly Bearheart were rangers in training, who had spent many weekends helping their seniors at the station, or enjoying the wilderness at the cabin with their families. Bly, being the oldest and most responsible of the group, convinced Shauna's dad to let her coven use the cabin for the weekend while the park was under repair. Coley, Stella, and Gretchen were virgins to the wilderness, and initially tagged along out of tradition, if anything. The Hellraisers Club, as the 5 had called themselves since junior high, historically did everything together, especially in the absence of responsible adults. Gretchen tunes out Stella's annoying, pointless tennis club anecdotes and instead listens to Shauna Whitecloud in the kitchen, deducing the other side of the phone call she's having with her father. "The roads are closed," growls Gretchen, pulling her wool-lined leather coat tighter around her shivering body. She sits at the dining table with Coley and Stella on the morning of their second day at Carbon River. Before she'd spoken, Coley had been hunching angrily over her smartphone and trying to comprehend its lack of service bars, while Stella had been warming up with another shot from the silver whiskey flask she'd stolen from her alcoholic father. Now Coley looks up in abject horror, her big doll eyes growing bigger. Stella merely blinks once, then takes another drink. "She said we were only going to be here for the weekend," whines Coley. Gretchen's sigh is almost a hiss as she lays her head on the table. Phone call concluded, Shauna Whitecloud walks slowly out of the kitchen and toward the table, smiling that sweet, sheepish smile of hers, the smile that means she's happy, or confused, or annoyed, or about to deliver news worthy of killing the messenger. Bly bursts through the front door just then, her blue coat and beanie caked with powdery snow. "Generator's all fueled up for the day," she says cheerfully. "The half-breed's done it to us again, Tonto," says Gretchen, gesturing lazily to Shauna. "Got us into another fine mess." Shauna's optimistic smile begins to crack. She looks at Bly to avoid having to look at the others. "The, roads are closed. Papa just called. We're gonna be stuck here for a while longer." "How much longer?" says Bly, zero concern in her voice. Shauna shrugs as she glances out the nearest window. The outside has become a vague, distant outline of a forest, lost in a flurry of white and gray. "Dunno. The phone lines are taking a beating, too, because of the storm. He called 4 times before he got through, and he hasn't been able to reach the city at all. He or one of the other rangers will come check on us tomorrow or the day after. They have their hands full assessing the weather damage, though, so unless things get serious, there's no telling when they'll come. We're basically on our own, probably for the rest of the week." Bly's energetic demeanor remains unchanged. "Okay," she says, and strides over to the kitchen, her braided hair wagging behind her. "I'll get breakfast started. Maybe we can go for a hike when the weather clears up." Gretchen snorts loud enough that Shauna flinches. "Joy," she says. "I don't mind hanging out in the woods for another couple of days," says Stella, smiling stupidly. "At least until the liquor runs out," says Gretchen, smirking. Stella scowls at Gretchen. She caps her flask and tucks it back into her pocket. Mid-evening on day 3. The snow has started falling heavy again, and the sky is turning orange as the sun descends. During dinner, Bly, noting Coley's skittishness each time the wind howls, begins telling her friends about all the mythical monsters she knows from Chippewa legend, and legends from other tribes. "How can you guys laugh at a story like that?" squeals Coley. "It's ridiculous," laughs Gretchen. "She's talking about a giant fucking rat god. Rats are disgusting." "What's it called again, Bly?" says Stella. Bly replies flatly, "Ugjuggnarpak. Gesundheit." The girls burst into laughter again. "Look, I didn't name the thing, all right?" says Bly. "It's Inuit." "Are those the Eskimos?" says Gretchen. "They prefer to be called Inuit." "Except the Yupik," adds Shauna. "They prefer to be called Yupik." "What the fuck ever," says Gretchen. "Eskimos! Tell us another one, Tonto. Regale us with more frightening tales of your heritage." Bly takes the flask from Stella. "They're not all from my heritage, you basic white bitch. I'm Chippewa, not Eskimo." Midway through taking a drink, she coughs as something suddenly occurs to her. Inuit! Fuck! The girls burst into laughter again. Stella lets out a loud, revolting belch. Stella, don't puke in my dad's cabin again. No promises. Shauna removes her scarf and hangs it over the back of her chair. Did you tell them about that skinwalker who lived in your trailer park, Bly? Coley turns a shade green. The fuck is a skinwalker? It's a shape-shifting wizard, says Bly, that uses animal pelts to change into a particular animal. We had this neighbor in the park where I grew up, always had a fisher pelt on him. A fisher's like a big weasel. Well, there weren't really any fishers in the area, or there weren't supposed to be. But every week, someone was chasing a fisher out of their trailer for stealing food and other stuff. A few people thought this guy with the pelt was a skinwalker turning into a fisher so he could steal from everybody. He moved away before anyone could pin anything on him. And after he left, we never saw the fisher again. Gretchen grabs the flask from Stella. So, if he had a dead hamster in his pocket, he could turn into a hamster? I guess. Gretchen takes a drink and swallows. Lame. Yeah, adds Coley, reaching for the flask as Gretchen holds it just out of her reach. When do you bitches tell a spooky story then? Says Bly. Stella steals the flask back from Gretchen, ignoring Coley's scowl. What one did you tell us last time we were out in the snow? I got drunk and missed it. Something about a Winnebago? Shauna bursts into laughter. It's called a Wendigo. A Winnebago is a car, Stella. Bly looks out the window at the blizzard for a moment, and seems to lose her nerve. She goes back to eating. Forget it, she says. That story would be too much in this weather. The other girls exchange intrigued looks. Well, that sounds like a challenge, says Stella. It's snowing, says Bly, turning again to the window. No Wendigo stories when it's snowing. It'd be too much. Bullshit! Tell us about the Winnebago! Bly sets down her fork, then looks at each of them in turn, as if assessing whether she will traumatize her friends. Gretchen takes another swig from Stella's flask and already seems to be nodding off. Bly gives in and shrugs. Well, they live in cold climates, but they hunt during snowstorms, just like this one. Some say they're undead women who ride the winds. Others say they're giants with great orange eyes and teeth the size of gravestones. Whatever they are, you never see or hear them coming. You might smell them first. They stink like something that's been dead for centuries. Then they whisk you away, and nobody ever sees you again. Coley shivers, watching Bly with unblinking eyes. Bly looks directly at her as she speaks, keeping her voice low like the wind outside. I was a toddler when I first came this far north for a family reunion, so most of what I know is what Grandpa told me. Every family has that one relative who's the renowned fuck-up. Ours was Uncle Reb. He never seemed to work, but he never seemed to be hurting for cash, and he was no stranger to the jailhouse. We saw him every holiday gathering, and Mom says he'd have 2 or 3 acid flashbacks per event, make a total spectacle of himself. Grandpa says he was a fun guy for a dumpster fire. Was? Says Stella, hugging herself tightly. Bly turns to Stella next. Our family reunions are always camping trips when we don't have them on the reservation. It was snowing bad this trip, and Grandpa said the woods smelled wrong, like something had died there. Once they got the fires going and the woods filled with the smell of cooking meats, it wasn't so bad. Well, it started snowing like a son of a bitch, till nobody could see more than 10 feet in front of them. Wind was fine, but the snow fell in sheets. I was a toddler, like I said, so I only have vague memories of this reunion. I remember crying because my cousin Sarah pegged me in the head with a snowball and knocked me over, and I remember Mom coddling me and laughing as she brushed the snow from my hair. I wasn't hurt, I was just being a baby. I remember Uncle Reb having an episode at the same time. Dad and Grandpa were wrestling with him. Grandpa said he was shrieking something about having to get away from the eyes in the forest, or some tweaker bullshit like that. Uncle Reb punched my dad, broke away, and ran into the trees, blubbering like a fool. Everyone figured it was another acid flashback. Grandpa wanted to let him go, give him time to wind down. An hour later, when he didn't come back, Dad gathered a couple uncles and went looking for him. Bly cleans the last bite from her plate then stares at her fork as she turns it over in her hand. The other girls lean in, hanging on every word. Only Gretchen is relaxed, guarding Stella's flask as she listens. "Was he dead?" says Stella. Bly shrugs. "Guess so." "You guess so?" "Well, they never found him. They found his scarf and one of his boots. I figure he got lost in the woods and froze to death where nobody could reach him. Grandpa won't let us go that far north anymore, though. Grandpa won't let us come this far north anymore, though. Says it's Wendigo country. He'd skin me alive if he knew I was up here with you cats." What did it do to Uncle Reb?" says Stella. "Eat him?" "They're more meticulous than that. They gut you, skin you, put your best bits in a little pot or a bag, and store it someplace where no one can steal it. That's what they eat before they hibernate. They'll torment you first, of course. Maybe call your name so it sounds like the wind is talking to you. And then..." Bly purses her lips and makes a hideous sucking sound as she swipes one hand over the table, snatching up the salt shaker. "They get ya. Just like Uncle Reb." The silence shatters from Coley's horrified shriek. Everyone shrieks in reply as she falls out of her chair, trying to back away from the table. Stella's startled flailing knocks over Gretchen's water glass and spills its contents everywhere. Bawling, Coley cries, "Something has touched my foot! It was my foot, you giant baby!" hollers Gretchen. "Jesus tinny fucking Christ!" As Coley fights the urge to cry, Stella guffaws. The girls begin to laugh. Then the lights go out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Coley shrieks again. "God damn it, Coley!" cries Gretchen. "Fuck's sake, Coley," says Stella. "Generator bought it," says Shauna. "You said it was full!" sobs Coley. "Fan belt must have broke," says Bly. She stands and moves to the window to assess the storm outside. It's still raging. "Someone's got to go out to the generator shed and find the spare." She turns back to the girls at the table. "Coley, get your coat and..." "Fuck you!" cries Coley as the others laugh. "I'm staying right here!" Smiling, Bly gestures to Shauna. "Come with me, Shauna. Get a fire going, Gretchen." Groaning, Gretchen complies and starts piling wood into the fireplace. She, Coley, and Stella gather around the fire, while Shauna and Bly put on their coats and head outside to the generator shed. The two girls trudge through the brutal snowfall together, walking around to the backside of the cabin. From a distance, their forms cut vague gray silhouettes out of the storm. Bly's ever-present stoicism makes her impossible for anyone other than Shauna and forest animals to read. Shauna can taste her sour mood in the air. After a long period of walking in silence, Bly finally says, "Do me a favor, Shauna." "Keep me from killing Gretchen tonight." Shauna looks at her. "She's not acting any more obnoxious than usual." "No, I just hate the Tonto shit. And how she calls you half-breed. And about a million other things." Shauna swallows a lump in her throat. "You didn't used to." She holds up one hand, crossing two fingers tightly together. "A year ago, you two were like this. What happened?" A long sigh from Bly. "I grew up, I guess." "She just does it to get under your skin, that's all. Like a tick." "Well, one of these days I'm gonna pop her." She keeps her eyes on the snow ahead of her as she walks and talks. "I mostly come out here to hang with you. I'm not even sure the rest of the Hellraisers Club were ever friends. I think we mostly don't like each other. But we hang out together because we don't have anyone else." She glances aside to add something else and realizes she is alone. She turns back toward the cabin. Shauna is 10 feet back, staring over her shoulder at the trees in the distance. She stands as still as a deer that just heard a hunter's footfalls. The trees are empty. "What is it?" says Bly. After a long pause, Shauna shakes her head. "Nothing. I thought..." She stares a moment longer. She turns back to Bly and continues toward the small generator shack behind the cabin. "Nothing," says Shauna. "Your stories always get to me." Bly gives her a funny look as she passes. She glances back at the woods for a moment, then catches up with her friend. "You ought to lay off the grass," says Bly. "I'm not high. I didn't even bring any." "Well, what kind of friend are you, anyway?" They bring no power back with them, only bad news. The fan belt is busted, and no replacement could be found. The generator is officially useless. This prompts Shauna to call Papa at the ranger station. There's no answer. She calls twice more with no result. The phone receiver is slammed back into the cradle. Papa still isn't answering. So call the other buildings, says Gretchen. I did. They must be on one of the trails. The girls all bundle around the fire, except Shauna, who paces worriedly around the dining table. Coley continues struggling with her smartphone with a chimp-like expression of frustration. Bly scoots closer to the fire and stirs it with the poker. Coley, put that away, says Gretchen. You're not getting a signal in a blizzard. I can't even check my Instagram. Why bother? You post the same fucking selfie every 10 minutes. Coley tosses her phone onto her purse in disgust. Stella drinks from her flask again. Bly stands and stretches, then leans against the fireplace, probably to keep out of punching distance of Gretchen. Everyone else sits in a semicircle by the fireplace, and they're all looking at Shauna. She stands alone, feeling 3 inches tall. Well, we have plenty of firewood, says Shauna, trying to keep hold of her waning optimism. Now we're basically camping in the woods with better shelter. Yeah, growls Gretchen, and assloads of snow, and no roads to drive on in an emergency. She glances at Coley while she speaks, finds her checking her Instagram yet again, and slaps the smartphone out of her hand. And no goddamn phones, she adds. It ain't so bad, is it, G? Says Stella. The air's clean up here, at least. We got a warm fire to cook over. Remember when we got snowed in at your grandma's place and stayed up all night telling ghost stories? Remember the time I had my license suspended? Says Gretchen. And Bly was too drunk to drive us home from Tony's kegger, so I tried to drive us home and got us pulled over. And while me and Bly fought over what we were going to tell the cop, Shauna and Kenny Galloway started fucking in the back seat with no clue what was going on. Stella is already giggling uncontrollably at the memory. Shauna isn't. We never get stranded in the woods when I'm the event coordinator, says Gretchen. When I'm in charge, worst case scenario, somebody gets laid. She moans in agony and splays across the floorboards like a murder victim. Ugh! Sarah Moore is having a party at her house tonight, and we're stuck freezing our asses off in a blizzard! Shauna looks at her feet in silence for a minute, with moist eyes. She says in a quiet voice, I just wanted to do something special. Next semester, we'll be too busy with finals to hang out much. When we graduate, it's basically goodbye Hellraiser's Club. Gretchen sits up with a mock gasp. You mean no more camping trips? Shauna looks at Gretchen for a long time, then skulks through the kitchen to the back rooms and disappears. Gretchen sits with her legs crisscrossed, draws a cigarette, and daintily lights it, then takes a long drag. The others try to find something to look at during the awkward silence. Wish her little brother hadn't killed himself, Gretchen mutters through a cloud of white smoke. She chuckles, reminiscing. Wouldn't mind being snowed in with him for a week. Hey, says Bly. Gretchen and the others glance up at Bly as she leans against the hearth. The shadows paint the Chippewa girl's gentle face into a mask of menace, and the hunting knife hanging from her belt is clearly visible. You watch your mouth, she says when she has Gretchen's attention. Gretchen blows smoke in Bly's direction through her Cheshire cat grin. Great minds think alike, huh, Tonto? With a flick of the wrist, Bly's knife leaves its sheath and embeds itself in the floorboards right between Gretchen's legs. Stella explodes with tipsy giggling. Bly bends down to retrieve the knife, making sure to lean within kissing distance of Gretchen's shocked face. No more Tonto shit either, she says. Morning, day 4. Bly grabs the foot of the snoring Gretchen's sleeping bag and pulls upward, dumping her onto the cold wooden floor. She awakens with an angry shriek. Breakfast is almost ready, says Bly. Get your snow clothes on and go collect Shauna. She's outside somewhere. The shivering Gretchen glares at her defiantly, but the tall Chippewa is unmoved. Why me? Says Gretchen. 'Cause you're an asshole, says Bly. 'Cause you're the reason she's out there sulking. 'Cause I fucking said so. Take your pick from any of those reasons, but do it anyhow. Then she strides back into the kitchen. With a sigh, Gretchen gets dressed. The snow falls gently outside in the morning sun, but the wind is still strong enough to howl occasionally and shake the snow out of the tree boughs. Yawning, Gretchen scans the brilliant white field surrounding the cabin until she spots the fresh boot-shaped tracks leading 50 feet ahead, where the half-Indian in the dark green coat stands atop a hill on the edge of the woods. She faces away from the cabin, staring out into the swaying sea of trees. She doesn't turn around as Gretchen crunches through the ankle-deep snow to the top of the hill. She only looks when Gretchen stops beside her, watching her curiously. Shauna gives her a half-hearted smile, then continues gazing at the forest. Tonto says to come inside, says Gretchen. Almost time to eat. Shauna mumbles a reply, but she doesn't move. Gretchen clears her throat. If I say I'm sorry, will you share whatever you're smoking? Shauna's breath comes out in misty white clouds as she laughs. I'm not high. I'm just listening. Gretchen stares up at the boughs of the nearest tree, towering at least 60 feet overhead. She shakes a childhood memory of tree climbing from her thoughts and sighs. Well, I am what I am, a nasty bitch. So there's no point in my apologizing, because you know I'll just make you upset about something else later. And Stella and Coley will be idiots, and Bly will be pissed at me, and we'll repeat the cycle till doomsday. Shauna says nothing and continues gazing across the woods, her brow furrowed. Her optimistic smile is on vacation. Listen, she says finally. Gretchen buries her gloved hands in her armpits and listens. Overhead, the boughs rustle and whisper, and the wind hums like a passing wail. Elsewhere, the wind hums again in reply to its own call. The woods seem to hypnotize her for a moment, and she finds herself curiously staring at one particular spruce tree in the far distance, somewhere near the river, bearing large, abnormal fruits in the upper boughs. Maybe weather balloons, caught in the branches. Listen to what? Says Gretchen. Shauna gazes a moment longer, squinting as if she's not sure of the answer herself. Then she turns and starts crunching down the snowy hill. I haven't seen or heard a single bird since we got here, she says finally. The birds migrate south for the winter, says Gretchen, crunching after her. Yeah, so do the birds north of us. They migrate here. Shauna stops and looks at the treetops again. It's like they went home early. Walking back to the cabin, Gretchen realizes Shauna isn't following her. She's heading for the forest, where the trees part slightly to indicate the path to Carbon River Ranger Station. Gretchen calls her, annoyed. Where are you going? I'm gonna see if someone's at the station. Maybe they got a fan belt we can borrow. Eat first, will ya? Says Gretchen. If I go back alone, Bly's gonna make me into a new coat. Shauna smiles her sweet little smile and laughs. She follows Gretchen inside. You're sure she's seen a generator before? Says Gretchen with a huff. Coming out here with Shauna wasn't just a weird recurring dream? Come late evening, while searching the cabin for any supplies that she might have missed, Bly had come across a miracle. The misplaced generator fan belt. With the retreating sun plunging Carbon River slowly into darkness, she'd promised light and warmth within the hour as she donned her blue winter coat and bounded outside to the generator shed. That was 2 hours ago, and still the cabin's only source of light and heat is the crackling fire. Gretchen and Coley sit at the fire, waiting. Outside, the wind is rough enough to give drivers steering trouble on the highway, but the snow falls in thin sheets. She ought to know how to fix it, says Stella, watching for Bly at the window like a dog waiting for its master to come home. She's a ranger in training, ain't she? Stella, says Gretchen, come sit with us. Papa's booze can only warm you so much. I'm waiting for Bly. And Shauna. They've been gone for hours. Coley looks up, suddenly concerned. They have been gone a long time. Do you think maybe they ditched us? Nah, they're probably hanging out with Shauna's dad to take a break from Gretchen's charming personality. Stella, says Gretchen, get your retarded ass over here before you get frostbite. Stella walks back to the fire and sits with her legs crossed, breaking out her flask again. I ain't retarded. I'm a redneck. Explain the difference. While Stella ponders the answer, Gretchen snatches the flask from her hand and takes a deep swig from it. She waggles the flask in her hand for emphasis. You're hoarding it, she sings. Spend too much time with Daddy and you pick up his bad habits. Stella glares at her friend as she snatches the flask back. Is that how it works? So your mom sucked her music teacher's cock too? A shameless grin from Gretchen. Still jealous? That's so cute. 2 minutes pass in silence, apart from the crackling of the fire and the low, steady howl of the wind. Outside, the snowstorm casts a thick white veil over the woods as if something has agitated it. Coley shivers. I hate that, she says. Wind isn't alive. It shouldn't make sounds like it's alive. Of all the stupid things I've heard come out of your mouth, says Gretchen. She doesn't finish. Outside, the snow crunches under the weight of rapidly moving boots. Then Bly bursts through the door, scattering snow all over the floorboards. She flings the door shut behind her and leaps to the window, watching the sky with erratic eyes as her breath comes in short gasps. The other girls stare at her like she's wearing a clown suit. "What's up?" says Stella. Bly doesn't hear her. She strides into the kitchen, grabbing the telephone receiver and dialing with trembling fingers. She puts the receiver to her ear and returns to the window to stare at the forest. The line rings endlessly. "What is it?" says Gretchen, standing. Muttering obscenities under her breath, Bly starts to dial again, when Gretchen takes the receiver from her hand and shouts, "Talk to me!" Bly suddenly seems awakened from a bad dream, staring first at Gretchen, then Coley, then Stella, like a deer put on high alert. "Can you," she says, and trails off momentarily. "Can you guys come look at something for a minute? I just need someone to tell me that I'm not crazy." The three girls look at each other, then back at Bly. "Before nightfall," Bly adds. They leave the cabin in a color-coded line. Bly in her blue coat, Gretchen in her dark brown woolly coat, Stella in bright green, Coley in purple with a fuzzy white collar. They appear to have stepped out into a giant Carbon River snow globe. Beyond the first few rows of trees, the forest all around them is obscured by misty white. Just above the horizon, the sun wades in an otherworldly pink and orange sky. "I'm going to follow the tracks I just left from the front door," says Bly. "Walk single file behind me, and only on my tracks. The tracks to our left are Shauna's from when she left for the ranger station. Don't touch them." "This is what you were doing instead of fixing the generator?" says Gretchen, already bored. "Just watch her tracks as I walk. You'll see what I mean in a minute." Shauna's trail curves right from the cabin door, past the window, past the olive-green ranger jeep, toward the parted trees indicating the path to the ranger station. The four girls walk in silence, Coley shuddering every time the wind howls, Bly pointing at Shauna's tracks again every few yards. 20 feet from the edge of the woods, Shauna's tracks stop. Coley, Stella, and Gretchen stand in the snowfall, staring and saying nothing. They take turns glancing at their surroundings, finding only the tracks leading from the cabin, and endless undisturbed white in all other directions. Gretchen looks at Bly and finds her staring skyward again, scanning the treetops with moist eyes, clutching the hilt of her hunting knife in a white-knuckled fist. "Bly," says Gretchen slowly. "I'm not crazy, right?" says Bly in a low, unnaturally calm voice. She points her blade at the ground. "The tracks just stop, right?" "Bly, what's the knife for?" Bly doesn't hear her. She turns slowly in a circle, watching the treetops. Now Coley and Stella are doing it too, unsure of what they're looking for. Gretchen repeats Bly's name, but Bly ignores her and says, "Do you guys have any thoughts to add?" "They're just tracks in the snow, Bly," says Gretchen. Bly looks Gretchen in the eyes and flails the knife at the tracks. "And they don't go anywhere! They just stop dead! What'd she do, flap her arms and fly to the ranger station?" "What's in the trees?" says Coley, her voice trembling. "You keep watching the trees." "Bly, for real," says Gretchen. "Put the knife away." "Everyone back inside," says Bly. "What about the generator?" says Stella. "No generator. We're going back inside, all of us, now." "What the hell's got you so worked up?" says Gretchen. Coley, shivering harder, says in a very small voice, "Wendigo." Everyone looks at Coley. Coley stares at Bly, awaiting a reply. Bly says nothing. Gretchen points her finger at Coley's nose. "Don't even think about it. Bly planted those spook stories in your head, and now they're running away with your tiny little ape brain. Shauna's at the ranger station, or she's spacing out in the woods again. Snow could have fallen from the trees and covered the rest of her trail." "I called the station," says Bly, shaking her head, still watching the forest. "Nobody's there." "So the phones are out. So we walk 10 teeny little minutes to the..." Bly looks hard into Gretchen's eyes. "The phones are working. There's nobody there. So we walk and wait for them. The sun will be down by the time we get back. Everyone inside, I mean it." "What if she got hurt on the path?" says Stella. "She could freeze to death." She then sighs in disgust as Coley dashes back to the safety of the cabin. Breaking out her smartphone and accessing her flashlight app, Gretchen says, "We can look for Shauna till dark. No sense in all of us getting lost. We just walk to the ranger station and see who's there, then we head right back. We're gone a half hour tops." Bly neither speaks nor moves, while Stella is already trudging through the snow to the ranger station path. The sun has already begun creeping beneath the distant mountains. For once, Gretchen looks at Bly without a sign of disdain or smarm. We'd feel a lot safer if you were with us. Bly clenches her jaws together as she reflects on Gretchen's solution to the traffic cop incident, and several other terrible scenarios in which Gretchen's boneheaded resolve had been the rubber cement keeping the Hellraisers Club from breaking apart. She swallows hard, then reluctantly heads into the trees with Gretchen at her heels. Carbon River Ranger Station is an even smaller cabin than the Bearheart, slightly larger than a public restroom facility. It sits in its own little snowy clearing on the lip of a sprawling valley, with the park road cutting through the clearing's belly like an asphalt river. A ramada reaches 10 feet out from the roadside walls to protect visitors from rain and snow as they read the historical bulletin boards by the entrance. The lights are on inside, the furnace toasty warm. Apart from a couple coffee cups in the front office, cold to the touch, the girls find no trace of Shauna or the park rangers. Bly finds a set of car keys on the reception desk and ducks outside to check the perimeter. Gretchen dials the Bearheart cabin on the office phone. It rings a dozen times before Coley finally answers, only to get an earful from Gretchen for taking so long. Shauna turn up? Says Gretchen. No, she hasn't. Guys, it's getting really dark here now. Hurry back already, would you? Gretchen's throat growls in disgust, and she hangs up. Bly returns, tossing the car keys onto the reception desk. There's a Jeep out back, she says. I can't find hide nor hair of anybody who drove it. No tracks anywhere. She leans forward on the reception desk and takes a deep breath, her eyes bouncing erratically around the office. If the tracks have been snowed over, that means nobody's been here since Shauna talked to her dad. It's not their only Jeep, says Gretchen. It just means they've been working all this time. He probably called from one of the visitor centers. It means, says Bly, that I was right, and Shauna never made it here. The girls stand in silence, listening to the low howl of the wind outside. What now? Says Stella. Do we chill here or go back? Bly stays frozen at the desk, clenching her teeth, staring ahead at nothing. Gretchen stands with her arms folded, looking from one friend to the other. Coley's getting scared, says Gretchen, tucking her trembling hands under her armpits. We should head back before she has a psychotic fit. Bly doesn't seem to want to move, but after a minute her muscles relax and she lets out an unsteady sigh. We spread 100 feet apart on the way back. You south of me, Stella north. I'll take the normal path. If Shauna's in the woods, maybe one of us will find her that way. She glances out the rear window at the dim orange sky glowing on the other side of the valley. When the stars come out, you both head toward me with no delay. I'll stand and wait, and we'll all head back together and try again in the morning. Gretchen scribbles a note before following the others out the door, leaving it in an obvious spot on the reception desk. Call Bearheart Cabin as soon as you're in. G. In the daylight, the forest is vast enough. At night, it becomes an endless hell of shadows and trees that, even with access to a compass, seems to lead only in circles, if anywhere at all. Even Gretchen's echo refuses to answer her cries to Shauna. When the first star shines in the sky, Gretchen accesses her compass app and starts heading north. After a minute stumbling through the forest, she reaches the cabin trail at the same time as Stella. Where's Tonto? Says Gretch. Stella looks all around them. You didn't see her? They waste a few minutes circling the area, calling Bly's name, neither one leaving the other's sight. There's no response. God damn it! Gretchen snarls. Stupid squaw! We can't find either of them in the dark, says Stella. We should head back. They're fucking with us. I'll bet you even money they're back at the fucking cabin, laughing at us. Gretchen shouts into the trees. Enjoy sleeping in the woods tonight, Shauna, you half-breed slut! Neither Gretchen nor Stella says anything on the brisk walk back to the cabin, hoping to hear anything that sounds remotely like Shauna or Bly. They only hear the rustling of the tree boughs, the crunch of their boots in the snow, and the low, steady howl of the wind. A nagging feeling tickles some primal part of Gretchen's psyche, like the forest itself is watching her. She refuses to turn around and look, like Stella does every 6 seconds. Now and then a cold gust of wind rolls through the trees to chill Gretchen to the bone and wrinkle her nose with an ancient, rotten smell from deep within the forest. Each time she smells it, the scent is stronger, as if it's gaining on her. Stella glances back again. Her pace slows to a halt. She stares, unblinking. Gretchen doesn't notice and keeps walking. Ugh, what the fuck is that? You smell that? Gretchen, Stella says weakly. It smells like an open grave. Gretchen, hisses Stella. Gretchen stops and turns around. The trail leading back to the ranger station vanishes into an icy mist engulfing the forest behind them. The mist is growing thicker, swallowing the trees and the road, slowly but surely, as it oozes up the road toward the Bearheart cabin. Gretchen and Stella stare as if they can't make up their minds about what they're seeing. Is fog supposed to do that? Says Stella. All the time, says Gretchen, with zero confidence in her voice. They continue walking for a few more yards, glancing behind them again and again. They take turns coughing as the rotten stench in the air grows more pungent with every breath. Gretchen glances back again. The mist appears to be moving faster, gaining on them. Gretchen and Stella double, then triple their pace. Then they break into a run. They don't look back until they're tearing across the clearing to the front porch of the Bearheart cabin. They tumble together through the door, piling on top of each other in a slurry of snow. Gretchen flips over and stares in horror and confusion at the open doorway. The mist is gone. The woods appear as they did before. The girls lay on the floor, panting and heaving for several moments. They begin to laugh, to relieve the tension, feeling like idiots. Coley, trembling in the corner by the fireplace, watches them with annoyed confusion. Gretchen and Stella stare at her. You didn't find him? Says Coley. It answers their question before they ask it. Neither Bly nor Shauna made it back. Midnight. Outside, the storm howls on, playing soft, hideous, droning notes on the cabin chimney. Coley huddles by the window, staring out at the surrounding woods, trying not to shiver or sniffle, and failing at both endeavors. Stella and Gretchen sit in the warm orange glow of the fire, now the only source of light in the entire park. Thick shadows carpet everything beyond arm's reach of the fireplace, and past the kitchen door the building ceases to exist. Stella tosses another log on. Gretchen sits with the cabin phone to her ear, as it rings unanswered for the 30th time. She debates whether or not to share something that had bothered her during their fruitless search for Shauna. Loathing the silence, she decides to share. We should have run into some kind of wildlife out there, shouldn't we? Before nightfall? Stella glances at Gretchen briefly in mid-drink from her flask. Be glad we didn't. Shauna said there have been no birds in the woods since we got here. The forest's been dead quiet all this time. I never noticed till she pointed it out. Did you? Stella struggles to think in spite of the alcohol sloshing around in her head. She shakes her head no. Gretchen slaps the flask out of Stella's hand and across the room. Sober up, goddammit! What the hell? Shouts Stella. Nobody drinks or smokes anything till we get out of here. You got it? Bad enough that the best of us are missing. Don't need a drunk tripping us up, too. Oh, now you call him the best of us, says Stella, baring her teeth as she speaks. Why can't you say that when they're around to hear it, you fucking hypocrite? What kind of nice things you say about me and Coley when we aren't around? Gretchen doesn't reply and stares at the wall. Her phone call remains unanswered, so she hangs up. Stella sits quietly fidgeting, already missing her flask, but not daring to retrieve it. Something scared him off, says Coley after a long silence. Stella and Gretchen turn to Coley and find her staring out the window, watching the woods with eyes that seem ready to pop out of her head and bounce off the glass. When animals get scared, she says, they don't hang around with what scares them. They leave. That's why it's so quiet here. Coley looks at her friends over her shoulder. Something new moved in. Something that doesn't belong here. Don't start with that Indian legend bullshit, says Gretchen. What the hell are you talking about, says Stella. Don't you listen to anyone but yourselves, snaps Coley, frightened tears welling in her eyes. The Wendigo! The snow demon that brought the storm and trapped us here. Bly said it's giant and gangly and has huge orange eyes the size of Jeep tires and teeth the size of gravestones. It smells like an old slaughterhouse. It hoards human flesh in pots and containers, and it's always hungry. It's only taken us one by one, because it loves to stalk and torment its prey, just for the fun. Whack! An airborne firewood log crashes against the window frame by Coley's head. She shrinks away from it with a mousy squeak. Not another word of that childish crap, shouts Gretchen. Where's Shauna then? Sobs Coley. Where's Bly? What's happened to him? Maybe Bly's snapped and she's brought us out here to kill us all. She brought up the Wendigo, and it was her idea to split up and search. Bly would never hurt us. She sure as hell wouldn't hurt Shauna. She's a crazy bitch who throws knives at people. She's been acting nuts ever since we arrived. You rather believe there's a mythical monster watching us from those woods, waiting for us to separate again? It makes more sense than Bly sitting out there in a blizzard with no fire. Gretchen doesn't reply. She scowls at the phone as she dials another visitor center. Coley, lip quivering, resumes staring out the window. "This is Paradise Jackson Visitor Center," says a park ranger voice after the fourth ring. Gretchen nearly hits the ceiling. "Yes! Hello! Mount Rainier National Park is currently closed. If you would like to leave a message..." Gretchen hangs up. With a long sigh, Stella pulls her legs in and rests her chin on her knees. She rocks back and forth, gazing into the fire. "Why don't we just drive out of here?" she says after a minute. "We got the keys. Just drive home and tell somebody what's happened." Gretchen stretches out on the floor. "Don't know the conditions of the roads. If we crash, we'll be walking home across miles of forest and blizzard. Maybe Shauna and Bly could survive a brutal hike like that. Not three pampered bitches like us." "So how long till someone comes to check up on us?" says Stella. Gretchen shrugs. "I figured they would have by now." Stella curls into a tight little ball as she gazes into the fire. "What if..." she starts to say, then pauses as if the words are painful to get out. "What if he already did come to check on us? What if he's disappeared too?" Gretchen says nothing. What if the Rangers went first?" Gretchen still says nothing. Thunk! All three girls nearly jump out of their skins as something solid hits the front door from outside. The door creaks and groans as it slowly bends in its frame, flexed inward by some powerful force. The girls sit motionless for a minute, waiting for the door to burst off its hinges. It suddenly returns to its normal shape, rattling slightly. Standing quickly to her feet, Gretchen moves to the door just as Coley looks back out the window. Coley erupts in an insane frenzy of screaming and backs away from the window, unable to tear her bloodshot eyes from it. Gretchen and Stella run to her as she crashes against the opposite wall, sinks to the floor, and continues to scream until she faints. Stella lays her friend on her back and fans her pale, sweat-drenched face in the hope of reviving her, while Gretchen runs to the door and throws it open. There's nothing beyond it but endless snow, endless forest, and endless night. Stuck blade first in the center of the door is Bly Bearheart's hunting knife. "I couldn't stop her," snivels Stella as she kneels over Gretchen's sleeping bag, wearing her snow gear. Gretchen squints her sleepy eyes at the morning light. She sits up halfway and says, "What?" "Coley," says Stella with a sob. "She's gone. I woke up to her crying and just caught her running out the door, saying she had to get away from this evil place. I got up and ran out after her, and she was already gone." Gretchen throws on her coat and follows Stella outside, where the storm has lulled into a strong breeze. Last night's heavy snow has nearly erased all traces of yesterday's tracks. Only one fresh set of tracks can be found, leading in great strides from the front stoop of the cabin. They lead 25 feet from the cabin and stop. That nagging feeling again. Gretchen watches the surrounding forest, and it seems to watch her back. Beside her, Stella cries and snivels quietly to herself. "I swear I wasn't drunk or nothing," says Stella. "She was just gone. I was sober, I swear to God." Gretchen half hears her as she finds herself staring at the odd spruce tree in the distance again, its colorful fruit clustered near the top of the trunk. Still watching the tree, Gretchen wraps one arm around Stella's shoulders and pulls her sobbing friend into a hug, kissing her on the head. "We'll chance the road," she says. "And don't leave my side, all right?" "Let me drive." "I got it." "You don't know how to drive on the ice. Let me drive. I got it." The Jeep moves at moderate speed as Gretchen gets accustomed to driving on the snow-blanketed road through Mount Rainier National Park, toward the exit that will take them back to civilization. The Jeep goes up an incline too fast and catches air, the spinning tires scattering sleet all over the road. Both girls scream until the Jeep crashes back down to earth and skids like an ungainly sled toward a sharp turn. Gretchen narrowly skids into a J-turn, stopping a mere hair from sliding off the road and into the river itself. The two girls sit wide-eyed in shock for several moments, panting heavily. They're still alive. The Jeep is still running. Probably shouldn't mention that my license was suspended again, says Gretchen. The girls manage to laugh a little. The Jeep skids and bumps and wobbles around every icy turn as it gets closer to the river crossing. Gretchen finds herself watching the skies instinctively, damning Bly under her breath, as she searches for signs, markers, or any indication that she is indeed going toward the highway, and not to another area of the doomed park. "The hell's that?" says Stella, pointing toward the very thing Gretchen is now staring at high up in the trees. The distraction nearly causes her to veer off the road at the next turn. Gretchen slows to a stop and gets out. Stella, asking what the hell she's doing, follows suit. They stare up at the top of the spruce tree, where dangle the mystery objects Gretchen had seen twice before and failed to identify. She uses her phone's camera app to get a closer view of them. Sacks was the word she'd been looking for. Jackets and coats tied into makeshift sacks, hanging apple-like from the highest branches nearly 90 feet up. There are 6 in total. 3 of them once belonged to park rangers. Gretchen and Stella recognize the other 3 right away. Dark green, blue, and purple with white fuzzy collar. "Are those ours?" says Stella. Gretchen's feet want to go toward the driver's seat. The squirming feeling inside her gut reaches upward toward the jackets. "Gee," says Stella, backing toward the Jeep. "Come on, G, let's go." Gretchen is only vaguely aware of her friend's words as she watches Shauna's dark green jacket sway gently in the breeze, the snow clinging delicately to the fabric. She finds herself choking on a sob, covering her face with one hand. When Gretchen doesn't respond to her name, Stella approaches her and gently puts her hands on her friend's shoulders. "It's gotta end like this, doesn't it?" Gretchen says in a strangled voice. "With me being the asshole. Especially to her. Cutting her down, calling her all that vile shit, all for trying to be nice." "Gee, don't," says Stella. "It's okay." Gretchen looks at Stella, half blinded by tears. "They know I love them, right? I mean, I just do everything the mean way. I just do. It doesn't mean I don't love all of you. You all knew that, right?" "Sure," says Stella. Gretchen stares up at the jackets and wipes the tears from her eyes. She takes a deep breath and releases it. "Sure," she says flatly. She grabs the lowest of the spruce's branches, planting one foot against the bark. "Gee," says Stella, "leave it!" "I owe him this much," says Gretchen. "It might be all we ever see of them again. I have to take them with." When she has a firm grip, Gretchen starts climbing, ignoring the melted snow dripping in her eyes from the branches above. She can't remember when she last climbed a tree. The tree in her yard seemed so tall as a child. Impossibly tall. A shrub compared to this tree. A fern. 10 feet up the tree, she hears Stella say from the base of the trunk, "You're gonna break your neck, stupid!" Gretchen ignores her and keeps climbing, more swiftly as she gets the hang of it for the first time in years. She makes it 30 feet up the tree, then 40, then 50, remembering never to look down. The strong breeze rarely threatens her foothold. It could accelerate to brutal, sweeping gusts at any minute. And then what? Her breath comes in narrow wheezes as she curses the cigarettes in her jacket pocket. 60 feet. She can see the stitchwork of the jackets overhead with her naked eyes. She can't see the ground in her peripheral vision anymore, just trunks and leaves and the distant mountains suspended in the air. The icy droplets keep landing on her face, and now they're running into her eyes. She pauses, steadies herself, wipes the moisture from her face, and reaches for the next branch. She stares long and hard at her hand, smeared red. The chill of the winter air slithers under her coat and across her skin. She catches the next cold droplet on the same hand. It runs deep red down her palm and spatters on her wool collar. The harsh metallic stench suddenly registers in her nostrils. The droplets are coming from Shauna's bundle, seeping through the stitches now and then as it sways to and fro. The insane notion of a squirrel hoarding nuts pops into Gretchen's head. An animal-like sound rolls out of her chest. Her descent is a chaotic, rodent-like scurry. She slips often, narrowly catching branches with her flailing arms to keep her head above her feet. She almost doesn't notice the impact when she finally lands at Stella's feet. Her body doesn't register the pain from all the scratches and bruises. From the ribs, she knows she's fractured. The moment she's on the ground, she scrambles and slides across the road on all fours to the trees on the other side. There she vomits and sobs for a full minute, Stella's frightened questions entirely unnoticed. When Gretchen's senses return, fear is the first in line. She backs against the nearest tree and stares with insane, rolling eyes at the dangling bundles. Stella keeps asking if she's all right, asking if she hurt herself, telling her she's bleeding. "Not my blood," Gretchen wants to say, but her tongue is turned to ice, and all she can do is make simpering animal sounds. She throws her hands over Stella's mouth and shushes her, smearing blood on her face. The girls stand there in silence for several minutes, listening. Just the rustling of the trees, the low, steady howl of the wind, the hum of the idle jeep. "Move," wheezes Gretchen, and races around the jeep to the driver's side. She slips in the sleet while reaching for the door handle and face plants on the cold, wet road, snarling from the stabbing pains in her right side that suddenly begin to register, ribs cracked, shoulder tendons strained and spasming. The wind picks up briefly and washes goosebumps across her entire body, wrenches her stomach with the death stench from the forest. For a brief moment the road is bathed in shade, as if the sun were blinking. The awful smell is gone by the time Gretchen scrambles to her feet and throws herself behind the wheel. Her hand is on the clutch when she realizes Stella isn't with her. The passenger door is open, but Stella isn't there. Gretchen whirls around in her seat one way, then the other. She checks the mirrors. She checks the windows. She checks everything she can without getting out of the jeep. Stella is gone. Something the size of a bowling ball forms in her stomach and rolls its way up her throat. It bursts out of her mouth as an uncontrollable torrent of weeping. Her head falls against the steering wheel as sobs rack her body, her hands beating the dashboard again and again, seemingly on their own. In the next minute, pain and survival instincts slap her across the face. She puts the jeep in gear and presses the pedal to the floor. She'd driven another half-mile across slippery, uncooperative road before she came to the massive spruce tree splayed across it like a police barricade. The jeep had skidded to a stop perpendicular to the road, the driver's door pressed against the tree trunk, and it has been sitting in that position for the last 3 minutes, with the engine off. Provided she doesn't get the tires stuck in the mud flanking the road, she can probably drive across the park to another exit and be home before dinner. Probably, but she won't. That path will be blocked as well by the time she reaches it. If she reaches it at all, which she won't. She's the last one. She's the last one, and she can't run fast enough. Nobody can run or drive or fly fast enough. She can't deny it anymore. Not after seeing those bundles. Not after witnessing the sight before her now. She knows what frightened Bly out of her wits, and drove Coley utterly insane. It could have taken them all in one easy sweep, but that would spoil the fun of watching its quarry run in terrified circles each time it snatched one away. Gretchen sits in the driver's seat of the idle jeep, watching in silent, shuddering resignation as a gangly, bone-white arm the size of a redwood tree rises from the forest, casually reaching to the top of the bundle tree with a gnarled hand as big as the jeep. It lovingly adds Stella's bright green bundle to its colorful food hoard. Then the arm ducks out of sight again. The Wendigo remains crouched among the snow-showered trees, where she can't see it, even though it knows that she knows it's there, watching her reaction with its giant orange eyes, eagerly gnashing its gravestone-sized teeth, stinking of blood and ancient decay. The woods are calm, the only sounds the rustling of the trees and the low, steady howl of the wind. As the snowfall thickens, the forest landscape becomes a beautiful, white, mocking portrait of serenity. Gretchen closes her eyes and waits.